so much, and hello everybody. Thank you for coming to the webcast today. I'm really excited to have you all here. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And for those of you who are listening to me again, nice to have you back. And for those of you here for the first time, I assure you we're going to have a great time today. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about the concept of change. And change is a pretty omnipresent, ever-lurking idea. And often it feels like, we round a corner, things are going pretty well in our lives, and all of a sudden we round a corner and we end up, running smack into change. One of the axioms, of course, about understanding change in the world is, of course, this idea that time marches on. Time is something that is always on the move. And, of course, if we ask the residents of Change Alley in London from 1890 or 1870 and we ask them today, obviously they would see, quite a big change in their lives. But it's also true that people change much more slowly than systems in the world around us. It actually takes a long time for people to change their behavior and their views of the world. And, you can just ask this guy how difficult it is to create change, whether that's on an individual level or on a systems level when you're trying to do something, pretty significant. But when we take a step back and look at some systems in the world, whether they're natural systems or man-made, we see that change is sometimes a pretty exponential concept. Here is a chart, courtesy of Ray Kurzweil, of an adaptation of what we think of as Moore's Law, which is the increase in computing power per sort of dollar spent over a period of time. And you can see that in this system, right, which is effectively a man-made system, in this system change is pretty exponential. And in fact, soon we'll create enough computing power to be able to rival that of the human brain. We also can look at systemic change in another way and understand that contextually, change sometimes emerges really rapidly out of a period of a long, great period of time of stability. So here is total amount of carbon measured in the atmosphere over time using samples of ice and from Mauna Loa and various marine sites. And what you find is that the amount of carbon was really consistent for a little while, for the vast majority of time. And then more or less, in the late 19th century around industrialization, the amount of carbon suddenly starts to spike. And it's sometimes hard to tell when a change is occurring also when you're right in the middle of it, the extremity of it, the intensity of it, and what it actually means in context. When we take a look at behavior change and the way that people change and systems change and take a step away, what we find is that while systemic views of change, like, for example, carbon or, Moore's Law, look exponential, our individual experience of change is extraordinarily linear. So that is to say, every time we want to make a change in our lives, we want to create some kind of behavioral difference individually, we basically start from scratch. Although we can learn from other people's experience and can be supported by them, the fact that you've decided to lose 20 pounds doesn't actually literally, physically help me lose 20 pounds. But if we took a look at a big group of people all trying to lose weight, we might see that change is exponential. So systemically or culturally exponential, but on an individual basis, linear. Now, we understand this through the framework of a concept called progression to mastery. And that really, if we look at it behaviorally on an individual basis, thinking about behavior and what we want to change, we can think about that as coming from a place where individuals have a desire for something or some different state. And then, at some point, future point, they achieve mastery. So it's the question of how we get from our desire to be something or do something or know something or behave a certain way to actually being able to master that system. And between the steps, desire and mastery, there are a series of concrete kind of behavioral or systemic steps that a person goes through. And those include incentive, challenge, achievement, and feedback. And those steps are not necessarily always in exactly the same order, but more or less in most systems, these are the steps that users actually go through. So it's from desire to mastery via incentive, challenge, achievement, and feedback. That's how we get from desire to mastery. Now, we also understand that a social layer that connects to incentive, challenge, achievement, and feedback helps amplify or accelerate the process of getting from desire to mastery. So we know that when we have, for example, a friend to go work out with at the gym, or we have many people participating in the same system, like, say, a webinar, it amplifies our desire to do that and makes it easier for us to actually create new behavior. We also know that there's an actual loop in here, right? In most cases, when we go from desire to mastery, we don't just get to go in a single step. That is to say, today I've decided that I'm going to learn how to speak Italian, and by the end of the day today, I know how to speak Italian. In fact, it's often a kind of looping process. So we go into this behavior change process with the social layer, going back and forth among feedback and desire. And so we realize that this really looks like a behavioral loop. When we want to take somebody or ourselves from where we are today to a different level of mastery of control or a different ability to see the world in a different way, we pass through this process of behavioral loop. Now, for those of you who are game players, you may immediately recognize a connection between this systemic view of behavior change and the way that most video games or social games are designed. In fact, they're intrinsically designed to talk to that idea, to talk to the desire to mastery loop in humans. Almost all the games and gamified systems that we can think of, whether Farmville or World of Warcraft or Foursquare, Nike Plus, or Micro Rewards, all leverage this idea of taking the user from desire to mastery across this arc of these different steps that we describe as being about incentive, challenge, achievement, and feedback. But it turns out that games and gamification actually have an even more profound effect on us and also connection to our physical selves. So it's not just the psychology of the behavior, but it turns out we may be hardwired to it. And one of the most interesting examples of how games can change behavior comes from research from Arne May at the University of Regensburg. So in 2004, a controlled study asked subjects to learn a new skill, in this case it was juggling, and then measured their actual gray matter of their brain using a series of MRI scans. And guess what? In 12 weeks' time, subjects' gray matter appreciably increased when they learned a new skill like juggling. So their actual brains got bigger. They got more gray matter in their brain, which is fascinating. And when the study was repeated with the different set of controls in 2008, May isolated the fact that it's not how good you are at juggling that determines how much, whether or not your brain grows or how much it grows. It's actually merely the act of trying to learn something, engaging with the ability to learn something that causes your gray matter to grow. And that may be responsible, interestingly, for some things like why multilingual kids perform better on tests, but we're not talking about that today. And it turns out that this
Excuse me, Gabe. Hi, this is your host, Yasmina. Just chiming in for a moment. Lots of attendees are having trouble hearing you, and they've asked if you could slow down just a little bit so they can try to catch up to what it is you're explaining to them. Back to you, Gabe.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. Sorry, everybody. We'll slow right down. So it turns out that games are also designed and also tap into a very important basic human piece of wiring in your brain, which is they're hardwired to produce pleasure. If you pass through the challenge achievement loop, that sort of pathway from an incentive to a feedback system where you're challenged and then you get achievement out of that challenge, it actually releases dopamine in your brain. So challenge and achievement releases dopamine, and that is part of our intrinsic reinforcement loop, the way our brains are designed. We want to proceed through the challenge achievement loop as often as possible to receive that sort of dopaminergic reward in our brain. And so games are really well able, they're not only able to increase our brain size and not only tap into our basic psychological desire for mastery, but they also are part of our hardwiring for pleasure. We're actually hardwired to respond to that. And at the heart of that particular system is this amazing chemical called dopamine, which is part of our reinforcement system. And without actually having to do many of the things that we view as being difficult, games are highly effective at causing dopamine to be released as part of the system. And so you have a powerful physiological, you have a powerful neurological, you have a powerful psychological, and then of course social reinforcement around games, all leading to the basic conclusion that they're incredibly, incredibly powerful at creating behavior change in people. They're the best possible way that we know to create change in people. And so it's time to introduce this concept, which is called gamification, that some of you may have heard of. For all intents and purposes, a good way to think about gamification is it's the process of using game concepts and game mechanics to engage users. Another way of thinking about it is that it is taking the best ideas from game systems and applying them to situations outside of games. So it's not necessarily to create games, it's actually to apply those concepts to systems outside of games. It's also important to understand what gamification is not, and it's not two things critically. The first one is it's not just throwing badges up on your website. There are many situations in which badges are appropriate. In fact, most gamified systems make use of badges because they're very powerful, but they're not sufficient to render a great gamified experience when your core product or service isn't amazing. The second thing that gamification, generally speaking, is not is it's not, in most cases, the creation of an actual game. This is not a trend that suggests that you or your business or whatever project it is that you're working on should now change to become a games company. Your job is not to create Angry Birds out of your, consumer packaged goods or out of your, accounting software. The objective is to take the best lessons of games and apply them. Because when we apply the best lessons of games, when we're able to invoke the behavior loop, and when we're able to produce the intrinsic natural dopamine reinforcement that games provide, we create positive engagement in users and the opportunity to change their behavior in a natural and positive and progressive way that no other system can do. And that's gamification. Now, a little bit more about me. I'm Gabe Zichermann. I'm the chairman of Gamification Summit. I'm the author of 2 books on the subject, the recently released Gamification by Design, published by O'Reilly, being the most salient for today's discussion. I also edit the main blog on gamification. I help many companies, big and small, apply gamification to their projects, both consumer-facing and internally facing their employee groups. So I get to work on lots of really super fun projects. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, and Yasmina was so kind to mention, we have the Gamification Summit coming up next week, which is an extraordinary event here in New York that brings together top thinkers who are applying gamification across a wide range of companies and industries and applications. I'm going to highlight some of the things that we will be talking about next week at GSummit through the examples today. And if you're in New York or able to come to New York, I highly recommend coming to the event. It's awesome. And if not, you can also go to gsummit.com and sign up for live streaming where you can watch the events of GSummit unfold. It really promises to be an extraordinary and fascinating event. Now, the effects of games on our culture, as described earlier, are more substantial than we even, can acknowledge at this moment. It is already true that games are the principal form of entertainment consumed by Americans today. They are the largest and most popular, they're the largest and most popular form of entertainment already. So we already have transitioned out of the television era. Certainly we're out of the books era and out of the films era. Now we're out of the television era and squarely in the games era. Games like Farmville have a much higher level of overall engagement and use than any television program available. In fact, 3 of the 5 top non-special programs on American television are already games on Facebook. And the adoption of gamification in the enterprise, so facing larger businesses, is equally astounding to the adoption of games and gamification among consumers. Gartner Group predicts that by 2015, 70% of the world's largest companies will be actively using gamification, and 50% of all their innovation will come from a gamified process. So the medium to long-term effect here of gamification is extraordinary. And we also have some amazing early case studies that we can look at from a design patterns and understanding human behavior standpoint, and I want to share some of those with you today. The first example that I think is really interesting is a company called NextJump. And NextJump is a very high-growth business based here in New York. They have 4 or 5 offices around the world. And the CEO of NextJump, Charlie Kim, is a very fitness-oriented guy. And he really believes that his employees should be as healthy as possible. And he believes that that's important for them personally. He believes that obviously it's good for the business because it means reduced absenteeism, lower healthcare costs. It's good for everybody. It's good for the environment. It's good all around. So he created a simple incentive system to get his employees to work out more. He put gyms in every office. That's a pretty common thing for companies to do. And then he built an incentive program that said, okay, the top 5 or 6 folks who work out in the company each year get a chance at winning a pot of money, which I think was about $20,000 at the end of the year. So the most workouts would give you $20,000. And he got about 12% of the employee base to work out regularly, which is a great number. And then Charlie thought, let's amp this up. Let's use what we know about human behavior and gamification to raise the level of engagement with the idea of fitness. And so they made 2 changes. The first one was they introduced team play. So they let people play in teams, make their own teams and play to compete. And then they introduced a leaderboard so people could see team competition in comparison one team to the other. Engagement with fitness, so that is the number of people working out on a regular basis at NextJump, climbed to 70%. 70% of the employee base, when these new gamified techniques were implemented. And what's fascinating about it, of course, is your actual estimated prize winning has gone down as a player. So you actually are likely to win less money, but engagement is way up. And it has to do with tribalism, it has to do with us versus them, it has to do with social promotion, and all the things on that behavior, on that desire to mastery loop that we talked about, NextJump, has been able to accomplish using gamification. And it's really, really a fascinating piece of research inside NextJump that they're looking at finding ways to broaden to the world. But team play, social play, leaderboards can be powerful in this context. Another example of a company who's done a great job using a type of gamification to achieve a significant consumer behavior change is RecycleBank. So RecycleBank has a very simple premise. You be rewarded in a fun way, so it's sort of think of it as a loyalty program but on gamified steroids, so there's a lot of gamification elements in it beyond just strict loyalty, for recycling. And that seems simple. Normally we think, okay, well, consumers should be, naturally incentivized to recycle. I mean, the bin is right there. And everyone understands that trash is bad and throwing things out is bad, so, how much easier can we make it? Well, it turns out that easy isn't always sufficient. Fun plus easy actually can help to change behavior significantly. And RecycleBank has had tremendous success using game techniques to change behavior. They'll also, like Charlie from NextJump, be at Gamification Summit. And one of their tremendous accomplishments has been they've raised the recycling rate in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, by 16%. They have reduced diversion to landfill by 16%, which is an extraordinary number. It is millions and millions of pounds of trash being diverted from landfill through the introduction of this very compelling gamified loyalty and rewards program. And it's really a fascinating case study in using that incentives part of the behavior loop that I described earlier to motivate people to move them down a pathway. Another really interesting example is the use of gamification in the automotive space. Today, if you want a hybrid or battery electric car, it has become de rigueur to put a game in the dashboard. So it started with the Honda Prius and then extended to other vehicles, the Toyota Prius, and then extended to other vehicles like the Honda Insight or the Ford Fusion or now the Nissan Leaf. And there's this concept of a game actually put into the dashboard that provides you with feedback, remember feedback from the behavior loop, provides you with feedback and positive reinforcement for you to improve the ecology of your driving. Toyota's was a kind of nerdy, simpler kind of feedback system. Ford is actually using a technique which we think of as a virtual pets game, or what you would call a Tamagotchi. Some of you are familiar with that term, a Tamagotchi or virtual pet style. And basically in the Fusion or Focus hybrid vehicles, you have a green plant that grows on the dashboard. And the more ecologically you drive, the richer, denser, lusher the green plant becomes. And the less ecologically you drive, the more it withers. Now, we could represent this system in much more complex ways. We could show you many different graphs and charts like Toyota did. But what Ford has done is simplify the feedback loop to make that even more compelling. And Nissan has put a social game into the Leaf's dashboard, which is so you can compare how your ecology, how your ecological driving is working by comparison to your friends on Facebook, which is kind of an exciting and sort of interesting idea. So one of the things that we are sort of excited about, conceptually in looking at this is remember that the car owners who get a chance to use this particular, these interfaces, these games in the dashboards, have already purchased the vehicle. These games are not there to get you to buy a car. These games are there to unlock the intrinsic desire for improved driving in a person who has a hybrid or battery electric car. It produces pleasure. It makes you feel like the reason why you spent the extra money on this car, that this car is good, and this car is helping you get to where you want to be in terms of reducing your carbon footprint. And it also represents, just for clarity, these games alone, about $100 million worth of casual investment on the part of the automotive industry. It is a fascinating movement around positive reinforcement around these ideas, and something we all can definitely learn from. Another great example of gamification, this will be also presenting at Gamification Summit, designed by a guy named Kevin Richardson for a competition called the Fun Theory. And so if you guys are familiar with speed cameras, many parts of the world have these speeding cameras, and if you drive by them and you're speeding, they take your picture and send you a ticket in the mail. So in Sweden, as with many Nordic countries, the speeding cameras actually, the actual ticket that you get is not based on how fast you're going. It's based on how much money you make. So that is to say, the more money you make, the bigger your ticket. So what Kevin Richardson did in this design for this competition is he rethought the speeding camera entirely. So instead of a big, outsized, abstract, totally private penalty for speeding, right? It's speed camera lottery, anybody who drives by the speeding camera at or below the speed limit is automatically entered into a drawing to win the proceeds of the people who speed. So that is to say, instead of a big negative ticket that you get for speeding, if you comply with the speed limit, you're entered into a drawing to win. I mean, how brilliant is that? That's a classic example of game thinking. Unpack this big negative reinforcement loop into a series of small positive reinforcement loops along that behavioral loop that we talked about that incentivize and reward and create pleasure and move people towards mastering their speed. But this program isn't just a super cool idea. It is a resounding success. Immediately after implementation in Sweden, speeding at the camera went down by over 20%. 20% speeding reduction. That is, if you projected that out across the population, that is thousands of lives saved. That is millions of tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's an extraordinary accomplishment. It has been so successful that the government of Sweden is rolling out the concept around the country. Really, really a tremendous success for this concept of gamification. And in this case, just three thinking systems in a way that can be more fun and engaging. Another example of the way gamification can change behavior can be found in Google's travel system. And so the way that Google handles travel is really fascinating. So like many big companies, they have a travel plan, they have a travel agency, there's a dollar amount per diem that you're allowed to spend in various cities and an amount that you can spend to travel to a particular city. And none of that is especially unusual or unique. That's all pretty common for those of you who've worked in a big company and have had a travel policy. But what Google did was gamify the way your travel expenses are measured. So if you spend less than the amount of money they allocate on the per diem or the amount of money that they allocate per city pair, you get to do one of three different things with that amount every year. It gets banked, and you get some comparison metrics so you can see yourself. And then you can do one of three things with that money. You can either A, use it to make a future trip more comfortable. So that is to say, you stay in a cheap hotel this time, you can stay at the Ritz next time. 2, you can donate that money to charity. Or 3, you can take half of it and keep it for yourself at the end of the year. And what this extraordinarily simple change in motivational behavior has done is it's given the users at Google, it's given travelers at Google a sense of agency, a sense of control over the travel expense system. So instead of it being us versus them, it's me and myself and how I get to accomplish something here. And it's been a tremendous success. Google will not talk about the numbers publicly, but people definitely say, in the millions of dollars in cost reduction already. And even more importantly, friends, it's gotten employees at Google to talk actively about the concept of how to save money. I mean, if you can imagine the employees of Google talking about where cheap hotels are and how to save money on flights. I mean, that is an extraordinary accomplishment in and of itself. Another sort of fun example that we can talk about in terms of gamification that's more a software view and design pattern is a thing called the email game. And those of you who have Chrome and Gmail may have played the email game before. And basically, it's a self-running game. It's a game that you series of challenges that you play against yourself in which you challenge yourself to be faster and more efficient at your ability to respond to email. And it rewards you, using all the systems that we normally talk about in gamification, like points and levels and badges and challenges. But more interestingly, it really activates a particular desire for us to control, right? It's mastery over the complexity and annoyance of email. We've all had trouble, right? Managing our Gmail file one time or another. And it's been a little bit controversial, the email game. Some people really don't like it. But actually, when you get into the design of it, there's a lot of adherence. Go look at the Google Chrome widgets, extensions, discussion forum, and you'll see lots of really interesting skeptics who then, once using the system, found it to be extremely effective in improving their speed and throughput of email. Another interesting design pattern example comes from a company called ZocDoc. And this is an online service that allows you to make doctor appointments online. It's a very simple idea, kind of like Open Table for doctors. Now, a number of sites have tried in the past to get their heads around the idea of how to give doctors a feedback score, right? Feedback being an important part of the mastery loop. And it's always a little bit of an issue because it's very hard for me as a patient to give you feedback about a doctor that would be relevant to you. There's any number of possible complications, right? And usually it's going to be negative feedback, like I don't feel better, And if somebody's got great, if somebody feels better, then the doctor doesn't necessarily get good feedback. So what ZocDoc did was sort of sidestep that by using a different metric, which I think is really fascinating, and it points to the importance of really, hard, easily measurable metrics, which is core to the discipline of building gamified systems. And so what ZocDoc does is it measures the responsiveness of the doctor, things that they can actually measure, like how quickly the doctor's office responds to requests for appointments, and how many people return to the doctor over a period of time for repeat appointments, and provides badges for the doctor based on that particular performance. So what it allows you as a patient to do is look at these absolute measures, look at these non-subjective measures, objective measures of doctor performance as a proxy, and puts the doctors on a path of achieving mastery over their score inside of ZocDoc without being resistant to the concept of consumer feedback. So it's an incredibly powerful unpacking of that motivational state. Another example that many of you have been exposed to recently is Google News has recently rolled out a series of badges that are designed to represent expertise around news consumption on Google News. And so based on how many articles you read, and eventually the system will become more sophisticated, more or less, in various topics like sports or economy or government or media and entertainment, you can earn these series of Google News badges that represent your sort of level of expertise. And what's fascinating about this is while many people sort of there was a lot of criticism of this concept at first, what folks who have gotten engaged with Google News are finding, which is Google News' actual purpose, is they're trying to find a way to proxy who's an expert at a particular subject. And while we may not agree that the person who reads the most number of articles on the news is, by definition, an expert, if somebody has read 1,000 business articles, in the last week, they're likely to have more expertise than somebody who hasn't. And that's the thing that Google's actually going for. It feeds, what's brilliant about it is it's actually feeding their core desire to create a better taxonomy and understanding of the social graph and the gamified graph kind of over top of, search data on the internet. So this is really a powerful example of gamification being used to accomplish both an internal objective at Google and an outward-facing consumer engagement objective at the same time. One of the different modalities that we use to think about how to understand people's behavior as it relates to games is this concept called Bartle's player types. And this is really a transition into some of the mechanics of gamification. We're not going to be able to talk about all of them today because we have a short period of time. And, of course, the book, Gamification by Design, has a great deal more in-depth analysis of gamified systems and as well gives practical advice about how to actually design something. But I want to talk with you about a couple of the concepts that underlie gamified design for you today, and one of those is understanding the player. The way that we think about players and their engagement in a gamified sense is really quite different from the way that marketing people think about their consumers. Normally, we're accustomed to segmenting consumers by their demography, so thinking about them as male or female, or 30 or 40, with kids or without. And all of those things are important. But actually, it's even more important to understand their motivational state. And so there is this concept, this is one of the original kind of pieces of game design psychology research from a guy named Richard Bartle, who did an exhaustive study of people in the 1990s who played multiplayer online games. And by looking at tens of thousands of people who played multiplayer online games, Bartle identified 4 core types of players, so 4 core player motivations. He describes them as the achiever, the explorer, the socializer, and the killer. And I'm going to talk about each one of them briefly today. Now, before I go any further, let me just say these are not absolute types. You're not only one of these at any time. You've got a little bit of each one of them. Your type may be, your motivation may be slightly different depending on which kind of system you're in. But more or less, there's a dominant one of these motivational states for just about everybody out there. And understanding this helps us design systems that are more compelling and interesting for consumers. So achievers, by and large, like to win. That's what they're really after. Just like in an auction setting, achievers really like to win. And what's difficult about designing for achievers is there are 2 core difficulties with doing that. The first one is pretty obvious, which is not everybody can win. So it's very difficult to design a system that satisfies all achievers because I can't give everybody a prize. If If I gave everybody a prize, achievers would say that's not an authentic win, and they would find that really hollow. So achievers need systems that create, legitimate wins for them, but those are pretty challenging to design for. The second challenge, which is more about you or the people involved in gamified design than it is about the consumer, is that generally people who are hard-hitting business people tend to score higher on achievement orientation than the average person. And so it's important to take your bias about gamification out of this discussion. If you think that games and gamification is all about challenge and and reward and winning, you're probably more achievement-oriented than the average person. Explorers like to discover things. They get their satisfaction. They really feel happy when they've gone deeply into an experience and they've gone to explore. And I liken it to the example of going into a market, like in Morocco, let's say. What's really exciting to an explorer here is actually going in and finding the thing. The thing itself may not be very expensive. It may not be very unique. It might be something that you can buy in a store, around the corner from you. But it's the experience that really gets explorers excited. Socializers make up the majority of the kind of consumer audience, and it's really people looking for meaningful social interactions with others. And I like to use the example, this is a photo from the movie Valley Girls, 1981, terrible movie. You shouldn't watch it, but I've done it for you. And in this film, in Valley Girls, we're really talking about, we're looking at this shot right here of four, young women in a mall together. And anybody who's actually ever done this, had this experience before, will know that this really isn't about shopping, the scene that we're looking at right here. This is really a social event in which shopping is the catalyst for that social event to occur. And for those of you who are not, frequently seen shopping with three other women in the mall, consider other games that have been in game-like experiences that are very powerful. Think about things like poker or bridge, right, or mahjong. What do they actually all have in common? And not poker the way it's played at the World Poker Tour, but the way the average person plays it. Fundamentally, they are social experiences, right? They're social experiences in which the game is the catalyst for some socializing. Not necessarily for, not necessarily just in and of itself. So this social catalyst is an incredibly important piece of our understanding of how a gamified system works and what is so meaningful about it. And the last group is the killer. And it sounds like a controversial group, but it's actually just an important part of our understanding. Killers are very similar to achievers, except that they generally play a win-lose game. So that is to say, it's not enough for them to win, but they have to win and you have to lose. And so they're out to actually, get the better of other people and cause other people to kind of roll over and say, you're magnificent and you are the boss. And I'm using an image here from the TV show Storage Wars to illustrate that, because this TV show, along with extreme couponing, are two great examples of seeing the killer behavior in its most extreme form. What's important to understand about killers, though, is that while they may be disruptive on some level to your system, they're also incredibly engaged. That is to say, they really care about your system that you're designing or your gamified experience that you're designing, and they really, really would like to be more involved in every possible way. So the key thing for you as a designer is to take this killer modality, take this killer motivation, and make it positive. Have it express in a way that actually helps the system overall to achieve and to grow. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but it's definitely something to strive for in the design. So if we're putting these elements together, right, we're thinking about, creating change in people, understanding that people's individual change is difficult to do, seeing that games are a powerful force for accomplishing that change through the positive physical and emotional and neurological reinforcement that they provide. Then we also can understand that different people's different motivations, what people think is fun, is determined by whether or not they're principally an achiever, a socializer, an explorer, or a killer. And so we have to be able to tailor our experience to the mix of people that we expect to have in our audience. Because in order to activate that game element, in order to activate the game change that we want to use in our system, we have to know what people will find fun. And so we have to design appropriately for them. The other thing that we have to be able to do in order to make a gamified system really work for consumers is we have to understand what they want as a reward. Right? So if we back up and we think about that behavior loop again, we understand it's desire, incentive, challenge, achievement, feedback, and mastery. And along the way, we're going to be providing our users with a set of rewards. Whether that comes in the form of achievements or that comes in the form of incentives, we're going to be rewarding them. Classically, we've thought about rewards in a way that I think doesn't do anybody any justice. And so when I've unpacked looking at games and looking at social games and gamified systems, and I unpack what rewards actually work for consumers, there's a new mnemonic I want you to memorize, and that's SAPS. It stands for status, access, power, and stuff. So status, access, power, and stuff. This is the new hierarchy. This is the new sort of Maslow's hierarchy, think of it that way, of needs or rewards that consumers want. This is what your customers want from you in order of most engaging to least engaging, and also conveniently cheapest to most expensive. And I'm going to talk about each one of these today so that you can understand for a brief few minutes, so you can understand a little bit about that incentive step in the behavior loop. The first element is status. And this slide in front of you is just a joke sort of status system from a game. But the important thing to understand about status is it is any time you give somebody something, a token or some kind of representation, that allows them to rise in the hierarchy against other people, whether that's in the real world or virtual. And status systems are incredibly important. Before the advent of games, we really only had a few limited number of socially accepted status systems. We had the workplace, we had community, we had religion, so there weren't that many places where people could earn status. But now, with the advent of a gamified environment, we have a basically infinite number of ways that people can earn status. And this is really good because people love status. More importantly, even more importantly than people's desire to have status in the world, once they have some degree of status, they become extraordinarily loss averse. So that is to say, even more important than people's desire to have status in the first place, once they've got it, they really, really, really don't want to lose it. And so status is an incredibly important element that we can deploy to help us create incentives and rewards that are meaningful to our end users. Another type of reward is what we call access. And here in this image, you can see a picture from Guilt Group's loyalty program called Guilt Noir. And for those of you who don't know, Guilt Group is a flash sale site, social shopping site with a flash sale element and a luxury brands orientation. Been very, very successful. The CEO co-founder, Alexandra Wilkes-Wilson, will be keynoting at Gamification Summit next week, talking about their views on fun and retail. So it's going to be a really, really interesting talk, especially for those of you interested in e-commerce or retail or luxury. But one of the things that this is Guilt Noir, and this is basically the box that you get if you're in the top 0.1% of Guilt shoppers. So that is to say, if you spend a lot of money with Guilt, you'll get this box in the mail. And this box has a scented candle and a little brochure and a little card in it. But more importantly is to understand what the actual benefits of being in Guilt Noir are. And interestingly, it does not include free stuff. You don't get a discount. You don't get free stuff. Guilt Noir, what you get when you're inducted is you get extra time in the flash sale. So your sale starts 15 minutes or 60 minutes before the average person's sale starts. And that means two things, which is really brilliant. The first one is, of course, you get your choice of stuff. You're always going to have your choice of stuff because your sale starts first. The second brilliant thing about it, of course, is it gives you 15 minutes more time to spend money with Guilt. And so it's an extremely interesting unlocking of that sort of behavioral desire as it relates to flash sale, certainly luxury good shopping, which is that consumers really want the status of the deal. It's not just getting something cheaply. It's the positive social reinforcement from saying to people, look at this Birkin bag I got and look at how cheaply I got it. So they're able to provide an access benefit to consumers that really taps into not only our social desire, but also does that at a pretty low cost. It really doesn't cost the company anything. And access benefits can be very powerful in this regard because they're often very cheap to deliver. Lunch with you or with your CEO or extra early access to something. Another type of benefit is power. And power benefits are any time we give somebody control over other people in the world, real or virtual. Examples of this include being a guild leader in World of Warcraft, or a moderator on a forum, or an editor on Wikipedia. What's really interesting about power benefits, of course, they're not equally appealing to everybody. Like some people don't really like those kinds of things, but some people really do. And power benefits are really interesting because, in general, they actually give the person something that they perceive as a benefit while at the same time having them do uncompensated work for you or for the system. So moderators, so on. Like being an editor on Wikipedia, as an example, it's a real job for which you cannot be compensated. I mean, you got to spend 20 plus hours a week, editing stuff. However, the benefit that the end user gets out of it is the power of deciding what gets written in Wikipedia and some of the status elements inside their community. So power can be really meaningful. And last but not least, friends, is this concept of stuff. And I want to put a really fine point on this. It's not that consumers don't like to get free things, because they absolutely positively 100% do. People love to get stuff cheaply or for free. And so I'm not arguing that free stuff doesn't matter, cheap stuff doesn't matter. What I'm saying is something very important, and I want to put a really fine point on this. In general, consumers can accurately value the free stuff that you give them. They know what it's worth. And they know that either because they're a really regular customer of yours already, so you're giving them something for free that they buy regularly. Here's your 11th cup of coffee. Oh, I wonder how much it costs since I just bought 10 cups of coffee from you. I know it's $3.50. Or they know this explicitly because the value of the prize or the giveaway is actually written on the thing. It's a $50 Amazon gift card. It is 20% off. So it's a really, really known number that people can value accurately. But status, access, and power, they're really hard to value. It's really, really hard to put a price on status, access, and power. And so people generally tend to overvalue them. They tend to impute a greater value in status, access, and power than they do in stuff. And so this provides you with an opportunity for arbitrage in the design of your reward system. And that is to say, you can deliver something of greater value than you can generally afford by focusing on status, access, and power. And the example that I like to give for folks all the time is imagine I give you the choice of two things. You can have a free cup of coffee at Starbucks, or it's 8 o'clock in the morning and I give you a special tool. I give you a special check-in application or near-field communication application which says that at your favorite cafe or at Starbucks at 8 o'clock in the morning, when you get near the cafe, your coffee will be made for you and ready and waiting for you on the counter when you walk in. So you don't have to wait in line. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to pay for it in real time. You just walk in, you pick up your cup of coffee, and you walk right out. No fuss, no nothing. It's hot and fresh for you. Which one do you choose between A and B? Do you take the free coffee, or do you take the not having to wait? Now, most people, when I ask them the question, choose B, right? It's obvious. Like, the free coffee isn't as valuable as not having to wait. But if you're an economics major, you might recognize that actually you probably should choose A, because the truth is that your time isn't actually easily monetizable, especially if you're a full-time salaried employee. I mean, your employer technically pays for all of your time. So it's not like you can make extra money off the time that you saved by not having to wait in line. But if you don't have to pay the $3, you definitely save that $3. So from a purely economically rational standpoint, you should always choose the free coffee. But why don't we take the free coffee? What's wrong with us? Why can't we be rational? There's nothing wrong with us. It's that we act from an emotional place 99.9% of the time. And then we rationalize our emotional decisions using rationale. We are fundamentally driven by our emotions, by our desire for mastery, by our desire to master systems and achieve the incentives and achieve the achievements and go through challenges and get the feedback that we need to get there to mastery. This is intrinsic, this is inherent in how we are designed. And we know that this is a powerful system because we know that when we observe change on a macro or a micro level, we see people pass through that behavior loop from desire to mastery across all the steps. And we know that when we do that in a game frame, we know that we have profound effects on the brain, profound effects on people's motivation, on their personal satisfaction, on their ability to achieve mastery. And so as designers of systems, as people who are interested in creating behavior change or creating engagement with consumers, our real job is not only is to get people to the top of their own mountain, to get them to the top of the mountain in the product that we design. And while it may be challenging to get people individually up to the mountain, once we're able to do that, once we can design experiences that are meaningful for them, that provide them with the right status, access, power, stuff, incentives, the right kind of user motivation, whether they're an achiever, explorer, socializer, or killer, and we do that in a fun way and meaningful way, we can actually create that behavior change for individuals and across an entire population, create that engagement that we're looking for. And so I hope that you have an opportunity, if you've got that time and interest in gamification, you'll be in New York or you're free to watch by a live stream, visit GSummit.com. The event is taking place next week and has a lot of the best, most interesting thinkers in the space coming to New York to talk about this both from a company perspective, a design perspective, a facts and data standpoint, and hands-on workshop that we're going to be offering. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And I also encourage you to pick up a copy of Gamification by Design if you haven't already. It's a great walkthrough of the tools and techniques around gamification that we talked about, many of the different things that we talk about here. And so, and I also encourage you to keep in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at Zichermann, and look forward to continuing the discussion with you there. Now, we have a few minutes for questions, and there's been some good questions that you guys have been asking. So I want to answer a couple of those questions for you, and feel free to enter more of those if you'd like while we have our last few minutes. So one of the questions that's been asked that's interesting here is about the use of gamification in an open source way. So David Klassen asks, are there any open source libraries for incorporating gamification functionality into web applications? And this is for those of you in the sort of open source community and those of you looking to implement gamification. So there are a couple of projects that are open source or free that you can get on board with if you're interested in implementing gamification that way. So one of them is Mozilla, who will actually be demoing their open badges system and making an announcement at Gamification Summit next week. So we'll have a cool demo there of the Mozilla Open Badges platform, which is the first kind of big open source project aimed around gamification, and it's really about education in its first version, but of course there's lots of opportunities to extend that. And also there are a number of other companies that provide gamification services and products that are both open source and free. They include Badgeville and Benchball, which are not free but are broadly used, and also a company called Big Door, which has a free set of APIs that you can use. So not quite open source, but they allow you to get working really quickly and get you to where you need to be, maybe a little bit faster. You don't need to build many of the technical aspects of gamification. However, you most certainly need the ability to design. And so that's one of the key things that has not been necessarily made any easier, certainly while the technology has made life a little easier. So a couple of other questions that people have asked, which is sort of similar questions. So we'll just take this one from Sandeep Kalbadi. The question is gamification equally effective in a slightly older demographic? And so will they get it, is the question. And Connie Mishner also asked us there, what's the group of people who are sort of turned off by gamification? So let me answer those questions for you together. So here's the truism. The first truism is important to understand. Gamification isn't always an overt representation of this concept. So that's one of the things I mentioned kind of in the earlier section of our discussion today. Often the manifestation of gamification doesn't look like a game per se. It can take many different forms. It can look like a loyalty program. It can look like a game. It can look like something different, something hybrid between the two. So an example of that might be Nike Plus, which many of you have probably experienced before, but it's a great example because it's very thoughtful and frequently updated. And Nike Plus is sort of a hybrid fun, uses many gamey systems, is highly gamified, but doesn't really necessarily feel like a game. So part of that, in terms of understanding your demographic and your player motivation, is knowing which form works best with your brand and also with your client base. So I often give this example when people ask me this question, which is there was a sort of finance website. This is a website that enables private investors to put money into private companies. And they had implemented a sort of badging system. And if you guys have heard the terms like whale, bull, bear, or shark, you'll recognize those as terms that are applied to investors. So they're very common Wall Street terms. So what this company actually did, which was a bit of a disaster, is they literally from one day to the next put these badges up on the website that were literally cartoon bull, bear, shark, whale, And needless to say, their 50-something, white, wealthy male audience thought that was really a turnoff. They were like, why is there this cartoon whale on my profile? I don't want people seeing this whale on my profile. And it's not that they actually objected to the classification as a whale, somebody with a large effect on a market or investment. It's that they didn't like the representation of it. What would have worked much better is to have used a system, for example, that was something like, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, or green, gold, platinum, black, like the Amex system, or, ACES, like the Mercedes system. So some other system that's more authentic to the actual audience. So it's very important to understand what's an authentically engaging and fun experience to the audience and map those two things together. There is no one-size-fits-all thing here. And so if you actually do that well, and if you're thoughtful about that and you look beyond our perception of what is a game and what isn't, you will quickly find that you can gamify it for almost any demographic because there is a game-like experience or interaction that works in almost every single demographic. It's just about mapping that the right way. So older white guys may not like playing Halo, but they certainly like playing golf. That's an example of my, this is a sort of classic example. Another kind of interesting question was asked by Syed Aga. And the question, and by the way, just also want to say briefly before we're out of time today, that folks are coming from all over the world for this chat today, including the Middle East and Kenya and India, and of course all around the U.S. and Canada and Europe. And we thank you so much for joining us today. So take this question from Syed Aga, and the question is, gamification isn't just an incentive system. And how can we use it in the corporate context when salary and cash rewards are the biggest incentive for employees? And so, Syed, I actually want to turn this back around to you and say I think a common misconception is that employees are well motivated by salary and cash. In fact, if you read Daniel Pink's book Drive, which is a very interesting book, but also when you look at a lot of research around what actually motivates employees and what motivates them well, you find over and over again the salary and cash rewards form a kind of hygiene benefit. So this is going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That is to say, within certain parameters, salary and bonuses are basically they're the framework. They're the sufficiency number, meaning you need to have a certain amount to get somebody to be attentive and engaged at all. But beyond that amount, it starts to become a lot cloudier after what actually motivates people, what creates engagement for them. And in fact, a lot of research shows that it's the other things, it's status, access, and power that people find really motivating and really driven. And the exception, of course, to that's probably in the finance business where the cash score is really the only thing that matters to a lot of people. But in most other types of industries and most other workplaces, the salary and bonuses are necessary parts of the system, but they're not enough to really drive great behavior. And so many companies are having tremendous amounts of success doing enterprise gamification in a non-traditional way. One of those is a company called Ripple, which some of you might be familiar with. It's RYPPLE, and they have a system that really takes the employee review idea, this once-a-year, really annoying employee review, and turns it into something that you do every single day. So you 360 with everybody that you work with your boss, with your subordinates, with your peers, you give them non-tangible gamified rewards for all those cool little things that they do for you all the time. And that is an extraordinary solution, to the problem of, for example, incentives and annual reviews, which nobody really likes, and Ripple's having tremendous success. And another fun example of this, that I often like to cite is at Target stores. So, the life of a Target cashier can be kind of boring. It's pretty repetitive. And Target has actual sort of, mechanics that they like to meet. They want to see certain stats in terms of throughput, how quickly a checkout can occur with a user. So what they've done is they've actually built this thing called the Target Checkout Game that runs on the cash register when cashiers are checking you out and basically provides them with feedback about how well they're performing to the time. So how close to the target time they're performing in terms of checking people out, just giving them little feedback. And what's amazing about this is, while on one hand you hear this example and you think, oh, that sounds very invasive and not really very good, and like Big Brother, Target cashiers love it because it gives them a sense of agency and control over their day and also provides them with feedback and also something else for them to focus on that they think they can master. So it brings us back to that behavioral loop of desire to mastery. So there's lots of great examples in the enterprise of using gamification, as a non-cash incentive system, to tap into that desire for mastery and motivate people in the right way. And so noticing that we're just about out of time for today, I want to once again thank all of you for joining us and for being part of it. I really enjoyed it. You can reach me at @GZichermann on Twitter. My Twitter handle is up there, and also at GSummit.com if you're interested in checking out Gamification Summit next week. I hope to continue the discussion with all of you, and thanks again very much for your time.